For many, feminism is the foundational belief system that drives their every decision, but for others, it has the absolute opposite impact. Any mention invoking deep disdain. The initial women's rights movement was about just that, securing basic rights for women, and it was successful in this endeavor. But since then, feminism has transformed so dramatically that it would be absolutely unrecognizable to the original pioneers. And despite facing intense opposition, feminism keeps pushing on in its eternal search for gender equality. But the radical feminist vision for a fair society is much darker than you could ever imagine, and we're much closer to it than you think. In the beginning, there was the first wave of feminism in the US, with figures like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton who argued for women to have the basic rights to vote and own property. In the 1980s, women had neither such right, didn't have many employment opportunities, and if they did work, they were required to hand over their money to their husbands. In 1920, one of these injustices was corrected when the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution was ratified, giving women the vote. The second wave of feminism started in the 1960s, coinciding with the advent of the birth control pill, which is arguably one of, if not the most significant event in human history. Why? Well, it changed one of the most basic realities of our biological existence, the consequence of sex. For millennia, sex meant there would be a possibility of pregnancy. But now, for the first time, women could suspend their fertility. This meant that women who were, till now, the great gatekeepers of sex due to the risk of pregnancy, could now theoretically have sex like men, at least according to second-wave feminists who were focused on ending cultural inequalities concerning reproductive rights and workplace discrimination and heavily pushed for sexual liberation. And they had many successes. The birth control pill was approved in the 1960s, abortion was legalized across the US in 1973, and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was passed in 1974, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex or marital status in the extension of credit. This made property ownership and financial independence much easier for women. This wave also brought with it the biggest shifts in the cultural behavior for women. Sexual liberation became a reality. During the second wave, many obscenity laws were challenged and the adult industry quickly established itself. While Playboy had already been around since 1953, the first Hustlers magazine was published in 1974, followed by Jugs in 1981. The third wave of feminism, which began in the 1990s, was focused on diverse perspectives, individual empowerment, and the oh-so-dreaded concept, intersectionality. It was during this wave that Judith Butler published the book Gender Trouble, asserting that gender was a social construct. The self-esteem movement, or the idea of follow your bliss, became more prevalent in this time, and the embracing of intersectionality meant there was a new lens in which to examine the oppression and privilege a person experienced based on their sex, sexuality, race, religion, and economic status. Meaning, a black queer woman would be considered far more oppressed than a white queer woman or a black straight man. During this wave, women continued to see greater improvement in their economic freedom and employment opportunities, a further breakdown in gendered roles, and an increase in sexual freedom. Currently, we are in the fourth wave of feminism, which has taken the ideas of gender fluidity, self-esteem, and intersectionality and achieved critical mass with the help of social media. With the implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies across companies, these ideas have made their way into human resource policies and corporate culture, as well as the writing rooms of major Hollywood production companies. Since the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, which was the first women's rights convention 176 years ago, a lot has changed for women in the US. Women have successfully joined the workforce, and many limitations of gender roles have been challenged. Female CEOs run more than 10% of the Fortune 500 companies. There are 337 female billionaires as of 2023, and women are outpacing men in the US educational system. Contraception is widespread, even though the battle for abortion varies state by state, and women are now out-earning or making the same as their husbands in nearly half of marriages, according to a Pew Research in 2023. Regarding the US government, currently there are 25 out of 100 senators and 126 out of 435 House of Representatives that are female, as is our vice president.
We did it, Joe.
And it's a similar situation in most other countries where every year more and more women are elected into positions of power and governance. So are we done then? Has feminism won? Has the patriarchy been vanquished? Can the feminist activists disband and go back to their day jobs? Well, the fourth wave of feminism would say, hell no. According to them, the patriarchy and female plight is worse than ever. Women continue to experience sexism, as the Me Too movement brought to light through several cases of women being sexually harassed in Hollywood. In addition to sexism, women take on disproportionate amount of childcare responsibilities and household labor, in addition to having a job. And if women are unmarried, they face a lot of pressure to settle down and have children or freeze their eggs, all of which is contributing contributing to poor mental health for women. It's for this reason that many feminists encourage women to stay single, saying, quote, "There are so many unspoken science-backed benefits of single life. More time for yourself and your friends, an increased likelihood to be fitter and healthier, great career prospects and opportunities, and potentially more financial security if you choose not to have children." And it is somewhat understandable why they are pushing for singlehood, since currently in the US, over half of marriages end in divorce. This is for first-time marriages, by the way. For second and third marriages, the divorce rates are even higher. And while divorce rates have decreased over the last 50 years, so have marriage rates. The real loss in a situation of a divorce, of course, is felt by the children and the mother. Since 80% of single-parent households are headed up by moms, women, it seems, end up bearing the day-to-day impact of child-rearing, sexism, as well as disproportionate pressures from society. So feminists would argue that we are far from equality. Well, the feminist Shulamith Firestone has a suggestion, as she laid out in her book, published in 1970, The Dialectic of Sex. Firestone believed that true equality could only be achieved when the following conditions could be created in society through the intervention of science. 1. Social gender norms are removed. 2. Men and women are made to look physically indistinguishable. 3. The nuclear family is eradicated. 4. Babies are not carried by women, but rather grown in little pods, thus freeing women from the burdens of motherhood. She also believed that children should not be raised by their biological parents, but rather by groups of unrelated adults. It all sounds outlandish until you realize that we are headed in a frighteningly similar direction. The trans movement is insisting that sex and gender are social constructs, and adults and children should be able to rely on medical intervention to jump between check boxes, while others argue that non-binary and gender fluidity, along with a whole host of other pronouns, is the way to go. Parental rights are constantly being challenged, and there is a push for identity-oriented community influence over children rather than influence of parents or elders. And the nuclear family is in tatters. Feminism has convinced women everywhere that their role at the office is far more important than their role as a mother. Many women, encouraged by examples like Samantha Jones, are choosing to stay single, stay childless, and as Samantha would say, fabulous. And trans woman Dylan Mulvaney is eagerly awaiting for signs to make it possible for Dylan to be impregnated by a woman.
Never say never.
We are closer than ever to Firestone's vision for society, and yet we aren't much closer to a utopia. In fact, society seems to be falling apart. There are economic issues like the shrinking middle class and housing crisis, but there are also major cultural issues like massive infighting and polarization. Crime is on the rise, drug abuse and homelessness are rampant across the country, and we constantly seem to be on the brink of a civil war. So if the nuclear family is to be blamed for society's ills, as many radical feminists would claim, why is it that we are at our most destabilized culturally today when the nuclear family is at its weakest? In 1950, 1 in 16 children in America grew up in a house without a father. According to the 2022 US Census, that number is now 1 in 4. And it turns out this is not just something that impacts the mothers left to raise children alone. Children without fathers in the home are 279% more likely to carry guns and deal drugs. And a study of juvenile delinquents found that 86% experience fatherlessness. Daughters from fatherless homes are 900% more vulnerable to sexual abuse and are 7 times more likely to become pregnant before the age of 17. 75% of rapists are motivated by displaced anger that is associated with feelings of abandonment that involves their father. And 75% of adolescent patients being treated in substance abuse centers are from fatherless homes. 90% of the youth in the US who decided to run away from home or become homeless originally come from a fatherless home. The displacement of the stable family environment has had devastating impact on the individual and in the process, our society. Seeing this data, we can understand why issues like homelessness, crime, drug abuse, and mental illness have become so rampant in America. You need only to look on any major city streets and you see the absolute devastation of drug usage on young individuals. And the problem of fatherlessness is particularly impacting the African American communities, where 48% of the homes are fatherless. Hispanic households have a 26% fatherless rate, while Caucasian white households have an 18% fatherless rate. Asian households incidentally have the lowest fatherless rate of 15%. Firestone's assertion that it would be greatly beneficial that children should be raised away from their biological parents is categorically false. Turns out, after countless research done on this matter, children raised by both their parents, even of the same gender, have a far greater likelihood to be well-adjusted and mentally healthy compared to those raised by single parents, something Melissa Kearney discusses in great detail in her book, Two-Parent Privilege. In face of this crisis and the increased burden on women to raise children alone, the government has stepped in and supplemented the father through welfare and child support laws, but nothing can adequately make up for the absence of a father. So, what caused this catastrophe catastrophic shift in family dynamics. Was it feminism? Well, believe it or not, it was the advent of birth control and the legalization of abortion. Before the 1960s, in America, if a man got a woman pregnant, it was societally expected of him to marry her, often referred to as a shotgun wedding. But once women were given the choice to terminate the pregnancy, it also gave men the choice to abandon their responsibility. This is a common argument you hear today where people cite the multiple forms of contraception that are available to women, wondering why then a man should be forced to be financially and emotionally responsible for children that he had no choices in conceiving. So which side is correct here? Is it the feminists that have consistently brought more and more options for reproductive rights to women, as well as transformed the divorce court systems into legislating heavily in favor of mothers as far as alimony, child support, and visitation rights? Or is it the red pill movement that proclaims that men have no rights or choices, and as such are entitled to abandon women and children at their own discretion? Turns out they're both wrong, but both sides are reacting to each other. The initial women's rights movement was a response to a male-dominated society that insisted that women should exist as silent support acts for their men. But as they gained more and more successes and actually achieved equal status for women, they chose to keep going, and the underlying motivation evolved from righting a wrong to exacting revenge. The narrative shifted from equality for women to down with men, and men became the focal point of all the hatred. The feminist movement sought to convince the world that every single ill in society was because of men, and that by simply existing, men led privileged, easy lives. They became the ultimate villains, not a group of people to reconcile with, but an oppressive class that needed to be vanquished, or at the very least, dominated. This understanding of men could not be further from the truth. Historically, some men have enjoyed the privileges of being at the top of the hierarchy, in the form of money, power, and influence, but the privilege a king or president has enjoyed is far different from a serf or a garbage man. But to claim that because most leaders throughout history have been men means all men have enjoyed all boons of society is as misguided as assuming that all women are inherently good. In fact, it's men who have always been considered the disposable group, always placed on the front lines of the most uncomfortable aspects of society. Whether it's down in the trenches of warfare or up on the power lines, it's their willingness to put their lives on the line that have kept the gates guarded, the streets safe, and the power running. It's even the men that make sure that garbage is promptly hauled away. But the feminists refuse to acknowledge any of that. They refuse to acknowledge that it's the patriarchy that keeps the lights on. And it's the spread of this intense disdain that has poisoned the relationships between men and women. Why should men step up to their responsibilities to women and children if all they will receive is scorn and derision for simply existing? But feminists didn't stop there. In fact, they have been just as successful at causing harm to children and women too. In their relentless push for female freedom, feminists have successfully destroyed a fundamental belief system among their followers: the sanctity of life. Wherever you land on the issue of abortion, it's hard to deny that radical feminists almost relish in the carnage that the act requires and inviting the opportunity to undergo such a procedure to make their point. It's one thing if you recognize the societal need for it, but respect the gravity of such a notion and seek to avoid it as much as possible versus celebrating its occurrence. And it's on points like these that the feminists found themselves aligned with Hugh Hefner, who used his influence in Playboy to support legalizing abortion and birth control, proclaiming himself to be a feminist. He was accepted into the circle with open arms. After all, he was advocating for the same sexual freedom for women that the feminists were calling for, the right to have sex like a man. But the massive adult industry has been built on the coercion of young runaway girls looking to make money to survive and finding themselves in unexpected and difficult filming situations, and ultimately their lives and reputations destroyed. Many women of this industry years later have talked about the true violation and emotional toll of these experiences, as Louise Perry discusses in great detail in her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, where she interviews many women from the adult and prostitution industry. Am I saying just Hugh Hefner and other adult industry moguls are to be blamed for the treatment these women receive? No, while they are partially to be blamed, equal responsibility belongs to feminism that has tried to convince women that we can in fact have sex like men, and that any discomfort we feel in engaging in casual sex or participating in being sexually objectified should be pushed down, because the cause of that discomfort is not biological, but societal. This is false. Again, refer to Louise Perry's book if you're interested in exploring this point in greater detail. As I said before, women have been the great gatekeepers of sex because of the risks of pregnancy, but also our hormones are designed to help us bond to sexual partners, and a simple pill that was created merely 60 years ago is not going to change a million years of biology, and neither is brainwashing attempts from the feminists. Adult content hasn't been great for men either. There's a reason why so many podcasts have brought light to the very real issue of adult content addiction and its overall impact on men's mental and sexual health. I won't dive into why why here, but I will say that in a world content with demonizing men for every aspect of their masculinity and convincing women that any form of real-world male attention is akin to harassment, it only seems reasonable that many men will look for their sexual needs virtually. So it would seem that in 60 years, radical feminism has turned women into sexualized objects disconnected from their biology and any emotional connection, and men into passive voyeurs brimming with self-loathing, while any real-world relationship between the sexes have been completely destabilized. Men and women no longer look at each other as complementary partners to collaborate with, but rather the enemy that they need to constantly be in competition with, keeping score of who does what for society in the house and earns more and has better listening and multitasking skills. Every female decision and plight is received with care, consideration, and support, while every male one is dismissed and mocked. Mothers are lauded for their sacrifice, their importance unquestionable, while fathers are considered stupid and useless by default. And with the proliferation of porn and dating apps, we look at the opposite sex as short-term sources of pleasure, but eventually disposable, even if the relationship is long-term. On any TikTok of a woman complaining that her husband doesn't do the dishes and leaves socks around the house, you'll find the comment section filled with people telling her to leave him queen, confirming that in reality she is too good for him. And good-looking men hear something similar, where a small miscalculated act from his girlfriend means his followers are quick to accuse her of using him or being a gold digger. And various influencers are proclaiming that it's stupid to even get married, or better yet, it's quite fashionable to be divorced. This is the true damage of feminism. It took out the connection between men and women, and now every child of a tumultuous divorced household as an adult walks around like a zombie, turning over the various aspects of his childhood that made him feel abandoned and unloved, a void being filled instead by therapy, a porn addiction, and a motley crew of friends he chooses to spend Christmas with because his dad is unreliable and his mom has a new husband he doesn't get along with. History was never perfect, and I would never dare suggest we go back to a time when women couldn't vote and should be chained to the kitchen stove barefoot and pregnant, just like I would never suggest that men should be stripped of all of their masculinity in favor of a matriarchy. But I do wonder what would happen if as a society we stop pretending that sex is a casual animalistic act. Yes, animals do it, but animals don't have to actively raise their child till 18. An animal doesn't have to wake up multiple times in the middle of the night to change diapers and make sure their baby is fed. Children require a great investment of time and care to turn them into healthy adults, and the act that results in their creation should be treated with care. Sex should be treated as a great display of love and trust, not a transactional means to quick and cheap satisfaction. And what if we agreed that porn hurts women who are sexually objectified for its creation, as well as the men who get caught in the grips of an unfeeling algorithm intent on getting them hooked and never letting go? And most importantly, what if we all agreed that men and women bring complementary strengths to the table that should be celebrated and supported and combined to create families that provide for healthy and eternally loved children? I wonder then if we could undo the terrible impact that feminism has had on our lives. I wonder what heights our society could scale then.